Well, let's start with polls first, shall we, Mark? Kind of state of the polling,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
we'll jump into the debate because I know that's where you want to spend the bulk of the time, probably. So the big news today is yesterday's release of the latest New York Times Siena College poll. This one is really a big deal in terms of recent polling because really what it does, Mark, it's and I might help make a distinction here. Pollsters themselves and pundits typically have started using the phrase quality poll versus sort of all the others. And a quality poll is simply what they mean by that is the amount of resources put in to making a poll as accurate as possible. It has to do with sample size. It has to do with the number of adjustments that are made to the various demographics that are part of it. It has to do with a whole host of things, but you could call it more generically in colloquial terms one of the big ones, right? One of the big polls that's put out there, the top 4 or 5 that most people are paying attention to. And this is getting a lot of attention. We can't have time to dig down into all the nuances, but it has Trump up by a point nationally. That means obviously nothing in terms of the outcome of the Electoral College. I always remind people of that. Come on, it's going to be those 7 or 8 battleground swing states. Those are the ones we're watching. The rest of the Electoral College is pretty well divvied up. Those individual states are going to decide things. But if you dig down a little bit, Mark, there are some interesting things. For example, I'll just give you one that a lot of people are talking about. If you ask people, do you want change in this election? 62% apparently say yes, that is a really important thing to me. Okay, well, who in your mind of the two main candidates is the candidate of change? Now, this may or may not surprise some people because she is the sitting vice president, but Kamala Harris gets about a quarter of the support. Yeah, about 25%. Yeah, she's the candidate of change. But double that, almost half say, no, Trump is the candidate of change. So those are the kinds of things that pollsters are looking at in terms of trend lines, Mark. And also, I'll just say this. If you look at the top line and bottom line of this poll, Kamala Harris has had whatever bounce she's going to get, right? As the new candidate, as the new kid on the block, quote unquote, at least to this race, her convention bounce, whatever that was going to be or not going to be, whatever bounce she was going to get after replacing Joe Biden, that is now baked into this poll. And that's why people are taking it very seriously, because it essentially shows that neck and neck race we had starting this year.
I'm seeing in the chat people saying that the polls don't account for Roe, for example, the incredible rage. Here it is. Here's one comment. Mountain bike fans, I don't think any of these damn polls are accounting for Roe rage. But I would think that they would account for that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a poll, and the Roe
Yeah,
rage
that's
is built into the poll.
right. And the road rage, that's not new, right? It's been around for a while. I mean, this has gone on for the last couple of years, really. So, no, that is taken into account. And of course, as part of the polling, you could dig down and see what issues are most important to you. And Roe, the whole abortion issue is going to be part of that. But again, only part of it. And so, we know the other big issues that are sitting out there. They're immigration, they're the economy, they're inflation. They are, for some people, as you well know, Mark, the Middle East, Israel, Gaza. So there are a host of issues. Yes, the Roe rage, as people are calling it, or the concerns over abortion, are clearly part of this and other major polls.
So, speak to this for a second. Female voter registration is way, way up, says Armando. Uh, A, is that true? B, can you calibrate its effect?
Well, certainly the women vote, as people like to say it generically, and I think that really does a disservice to women, frankly, because women are all over the map just like every other demographic is. I think it's really unfortunate that we try to block out, well, Latinos are going to vote this way, blacks are going to vote this way, women are going to vote this way, because if you look at the numbers, that simply is not borne out. I mean, there will be trends, and we can talk about that in terms of the women's vote now. But I think it's really important that we not label people with a monolithic block, that they are all going to trend this way. Now, having said that, we know that right now, uh, Kamala Harris is polling, depending on your poll look at, but she typically has double digit support above Trump among women. And for Trump, he has greater support among men than women. But interestingly, in this Siena College Times poll, Mark, she is doing better among women than he is doing among men, if that makes sense. His margin of men is smaller than her margin of women. So people are seeing that as, okay, this is a good sign for her, but they're saying she's still got to bump that up, that she isn't where some candidates have been in the past in terms of running as a Democrat. So, she's made inroads, but, again, how much more margin is there in that demographic, knowing that women already know where she stands on abortion? They know where Trump stands on abortion. They know where he is in terms of women's issues. So, there's question marks being raised about how much margin there is left, for example, in that demographic of women for Kamala Harris.
That's a fascinating stat, that her share of women and his share of men. That's a really interesting stat. And you can lose yourself in this maelstrom of all of this stuff on polling, but this is another one I just wanted your take on. Armando asks or states, women and minorities decide this election. Again, is that right?
Well, not totally. And Democrats are quite well aware of this, which is why they picked Tim Walz. They know that those demographics are important. And in fact, they know it's very important because, what's not been talked about as much, except amongst pundits and pollsters, is the fact that Donald Trump is doing much better amongst Latino voters, Hispanic voters, than Republicans typically have in the past. And Democrats are concerned about that. He's doing better amongst young black males than Republicans have in the past. But the male vote can't be discounted, particularly the union vote. And that's why you're seeing so much time spent in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, and Michigan, particularly where they're putting Tim Walz out there. And of course, the Trump campaign is trying to counter that with J.D. Vance and others, because they know that working class male vote, some people are hearkening way back, Mark, to 1980, the so-called, Reagan Democrats, is when this was first came to the fore, that union men were not going to just lockstep with the Democratic Party. And of course, we're waiting for this other shoe to drop, with remember the Teamsters union president at the RNC. And he has said, we have not yet made a decision on if or whether we are going to endorse. That's a new thing in union world. And so, men who are particularly working class men are still, in some people's minds, up for grabs.
Yeah, the union thing is astounding to me, because you have one candidate, you have one party. During the strike, the auto strike, when Biden is actually walking the picket line with unionized auto workers, and then Trump set up a photo op with those these are non-union workers. He gave them signs. It's such a classic Trump move, But still, somehow, union workers can be on the fence about it. And again, you can be on the fence for a lot of reasons, but if you're voting for the party that's more about unions, come on, man. Trump and Musk sat down. Trump celebrated Musk's firing of 7,000 Tesla workers who wanted to unionize. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, Mark, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to step on you. I do think you hit on something, though, that's very important. And that is that these various demographic blocks or entities are not single issue. In other words, yes, union workers care about union issues, but the research is showing they care about other things as well. They care about inflation. They care about the economy more broadly. They care about immigration. And so a lot of these other issues are animating union and workers, not just their candidate stance on union specific issues per se.
I would say one thing before I ask you about this next thing. A lot of this has to do with how motivated people are to vote. Getting the vote out is always so critical. So a lot of the things we talk about, it's not so much about decision making. It's about decision making related to getting out and voting. That's where this happens. And so in that spirit, I ask these other questions. And the first is about the much celebrated and talked about endorsement that the Cheneys have given Kamala Harris. So it starts with Liz Cheney, and she is a dyed-in-the-wool conservative, and she does a whole thing about how conservative she is. But the threat that Donald Trump, and I'm not, when I say it like that, I'm not trivializing it. I mean, I suspect that Liz Cheney and I would have a long, fractious conversation in a car ride, together. I don't think we'd agree on much. And her dad, I don't even know that I'd let him in the car with us to where. But both of them have come out for Kamala Harris. Now, to the point, how much of an effect does this have on other GOP voters? Is it any kind of bellwether for what might actually happen, and what effect does it have?
Yeah. Mark, this Cheney thing is very interesting to me because Democrats crowing about Dick Cheney is about as likely as Luke Skywalker crowing about Darth Vader. You know what I mean? It's
Thank
like,
you.
remember that Dick Cheney was actually, now we call it memed, right? As Darth Vader. I mean, the dark side. Of the Bush presidency, Democrats hated Dick Cheney. I mean, they detested him. They deplored him. So it is quite interesting now, right? That he's being trotted out as like, well, now what effect is this going to have? I think we have to put this in perspective. There's a huge chunk of voters who don't even know who Dick Cheney is. I mean, that's the fact. I mean,
Wow, is that
like it or
right?
not. Yeah. I mean, there's
Okay.
just, especially younger voters, right?
Sure.
Think about
Sure.
how long ago that was. That
Yeah.
was multiple vice presidents ago. And I'll guarantee you, most young voters go about as far back as Barack Obama, and that's where it stops. So is Dick Cheney going to sway a lot of people? No. Here's why. Because the people that already felt like Liz and Dick Cheney have been never Trumpers from the get-go, right? I mean, they are baked into those numbers. On the very, very margins, might it sway a few people? Maybe. But I'm just telling you, Mark, we are not going to see a major swing in the polls because of Dick Cheney coming out saying he's going to support Kamala Harris. I just think that's the reality of it politically. And that's why you're not, it's a 24, 48-hour news story, but you're not seeing people crow, but you're not going to see any ads with Dick Cheney, saying you need to vote for Kamala Harris.
No, he's a radioactive figure as I see it. And I totally agree. I'm glad to hear you say this because you have a real considered opinion on these things. But I saw it. I thought, well, this is somewhere between I don't care and I can argue you can play it as a negative. And here's how you play it as a
Yeah.
negative. And then I will get to the debate. You play it as a negative by saying, if you're Trump, of course, Dick Cheney endorses Kamala Harris. He's a forever war guy. He got us into the Iraqi war, and we would have still been there if he was still in power. I'm not a Cheney fan. I think Dick Cheney is what's wrong with the country in terms of the military involvement that we had in other theaters of war like Iraq, right? You can spin it that way.
Oh, you have to believe, Mark, that there's particularly some people on the progressive end of the Democratic Party who are saying, well, if he's supporting her, there's got to be something wrong with her. I told you she's like a war horse and, sheep's clothing. I mean, I think you're exactly right. I think they have to be very careful how they spin this because there's going to be certain people who do not have fond memories of Dick Cheney and would never support anybody that he says he supports.
Yeah, I was totally in the ixnay on the ain't che. I was really like, keep it quiet, guys. That's not something you want to advertise. All right, now I want to get to the debate, which is really a TV show. It's this weird thing, but it is. I think it's important. Will you tell me how important it is this time around relative to normally, and how we should evaluate this debate tomorrow night?
Well, we had on June 27th of 2024 a forever change moment in modern politics because the drift for decades has been, oh, debates don't matter. Come on, they never really move the polls. And if they do, it's very temporary, yada, yada, yada. And people would point out certain moments. I mean, those that are old enough can go way back to Mike Dukakis when he had that really horrible answer about somebody coming in his window and assaulting or killing his wife. And what would you do? And oh, man, that was a disaster. And he actually told me that personally one time when I was at the Kennedy School afterwards talking with him. So there's moments, but debates have been seen in it as inconsequential, relatively speaking, Mark. But this year has changed that perception dramatically, right? We saw one of the major two candidates in a historically unprecedented way lose the campaign on one night in a debate. And we know what happened since then. Now, as far as this debate goes, by all accounts, we are not hearing a lot of any kind of commitment. We've heard some noises. Maybe there'll be a debate number two. I'm guessing that both camps are waiting to see how tonight goes. All right. But there's been talk about an October debate. Nobody is committed to that. Certainly the Harris camp hasn't. What does that mean? That means that tonight's importance has grown significantly, particularly for Harris. Why? Because her debate performances are very limited. You have to go back to 2019, right? And to say 2020 to say, hey, okay, here's when she's actually done a debate that people think is consequential, right? That they can get something from. And of course, as we've sort of laughed about before, Mark, her most famous debate moment was taking on her current president over racism, right? That was her moment when actually that bumped her up in the polls in the primary amongst Democrats. All right. But so she has, in most people's minds, something to prove because she's done the one major interview, as you know. She has, in people's minds, something to prove. So I think Harris in particular tonight is going to be scrutinized carefully. The Donald, as people still like to call him, he's done a bunch of these. People will expect him to be a certain way, expect him to have foibles. So I think the stakes are high for both, but particularly high tonight for Kamala Harris. Or excuse me, tomorrow night for Kamala Harris.
Yeah, he chews up the scenery pretty much in whatever he's doing. And you just see him on the stump and he goes off and he's not in any way bound to fact, or he's all about the vibe and the feel and the strength that he brings to things. And so that's a weird place in which you have to debate this guy and knock down the falsehoods that you feel are worth knocking down. You have limited time and all of that. And now to the superficial. One of the things that Trump insisted on, as you're aware, is that Kamala Harris, and this is argued so vigorously by her people, but they couldn't get the concession, that Kamala Harris not be permitted to stand on any kind of riser that would have given Trump and Harris sort of an equal look from a camera standpoint. Now, he's a tall dude, a big dude, and she is an average-sized person, okay? And so you end up visually with, once again, I thought that when I say once again, I'm talking about the CNN interview, which kind of made her look so tiny. I think you end up once again visually, when you see that two-shot, with someone who's big and someone who's little. Speak to like superficial crap and how important it is.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, debate coaches worldwide are going to be, parsing this thing out silently with their classes, right? I mean, there is a component to that is important. In fact, we know this so deeply that it goes back to the very first televised debate, Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy, when the polling and all the debate, coaches. I mean, this has been parsed for decades now. That those who listened to the debate on radio thought that Richard Nixon won. Those who watched it on television thought that John F. Kennedy won. So anybody that thinks that visuals don't matter in communication, that's every Comms 101 class, makes this point very clear. Visuals matter. They matter a lot. And so that's very important, Yeah, here's one of the famous ones of Nixon wiping his brow and, looking like he was all hot and bothered and sweating. And, Kennedy looking, even the color of his suit, people said, man, that was a bad choice, that bland gray suit with that background. So this is going to be something that Kamala Harris is going to have to deal with. Mike Dukakis dealt with it. Hillary Clinton dealt with it. Both of them were much shorter than their opponents. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Mike Dukakis did use a riser, did use a box. But will it carry the day? No. But will it have some at least nuanced effect on people's perceptions, at least unconsciously? Probably.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's nuanced. And then this is from OCB. There's more than one camera, Mark. Geez. No kidding. Thank you, OCB, for explaining it to me. I don't know much about TV, but what I would say is that I specifically said on that shot, in which it's a two-shot where you see both of them, one will look bigger than the other.
Oh
Jeez,
boy.
OCB, give me. I'm telling you, Gary, my crowd, my audience roughs me up.
Hey, Mark, I gotta tell you, man, of all people to be critiquing Mark Thompson about television and shots is an absolute crack up. People, this guy is Mr. Television, okay? Cut the guy some slack. He knows what he's talking about, all
Yes,
right? But
please.
you,
Do you know who I am?
Do you know who I am?
Kind of a big deal.
That's right. All right. I love my Gary Dietrich. Gary, so it will be quite the ride. We'll look forward to the effect it will have. And I'm sure there'll be real-time polling, post-debate polling, and then we'll do a huddle here the following Monday. Love our
right.
conversations, pal. CBS Television, iHeart Radio political analyst, Gary Dietrich. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.